Hello everybody, this is Midnight Myra. Welcome back to my scary stories. The story for tonight is The Legion of Demons 3, The Open Scuttle by Mr. Lights Out. The ship groaned. Steel groaned under a pressure I couldn't explain. The hum of the USS Kitty Hawk was like the sound of something ancient and unsettled, something alive. Villanueva and I stood at the edge of the flight deck, the ocean stretching out before us, an endless void that seemed to consume everything. The knocking, unmistakable now, was louder, more frequent. It wasn't just a noise anymore. It was inside the ship, moving through the steel like a living thing. It had already been here. And it was getting stronger. "They're getting stronger," Villanueva muttered, his eyes scanning the darkening horizon. I clenched my fists, frustration building in my chest. Why? "Because the door was never supposed to be opened," he said, his voice low, as if confessing some deep, dark truth. My breath caught. "We buried that cave." If you like stories like this, I do spend long nights making these videos for you. Let me earn your subscription tonight and ring my bell. I will be ringing the bell also when I have new stories for you. Now, back to the story. He turned to look at me, his gaze hard, knowing. "You think that was the only one?" I frowned, confused. "What the hell does that mean?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. A long moment passed. When he spoke again, it was as if he had already made the decision to reveal a truth buried in his past. "Before you found your cave in Iraq," he said, voice tight, "I was in one too." I stared at him, trying to process his words. 100 questions flooded my mind. But Villanueva wasn't finished. He leaned against the railing, his gaze distant. Something heavy was coming, something I hadn't yet realized. "I was on a logistics run," he started, his voice softer now, like a man revisiting a nightmare. "A simple op flying special forces in and out of Al-Anbar. I had seen those kinds of missions before. High speed, high risk. No questions asked. But this one was different." Villanueva paused, and for a second, I thought he might not continue. "We weren't just dropping off troops. We were called in for an external cargo load." "Cargo?" I repeated, trying to make sense of what he was saying. He clenched his jaw, his face tightening. "A body." My stomach twisted, the words landing like a heavy stone. "They didn't tell us much, just that we had to secure a priority retrieval," he went on, his voice low. "When we got there, we saw what they pulled out of that cave." A cold shiver ran down my spine. The air around us seemed to thicken as Villanueva continued. His words hung in the air like smoke. "It was huge," he said, his eyes haunted. "Over 15 feet tall, its skin rough like stone. A deep bluish tint. And," he hesitated, exhaling slowly. "Red hair." I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. And it had 6 fingers on each hand. The stories I'd heard about the Nephilim, giants, born of fallen angels, flashed through my mind. But I always thought they were just that. Stories. Myths. But standing here, in the presence of Villanueva's dark eyes, I realized just how wrong I had been. "We strapped the body to the sling," he continued, his voice tightening with the memory. "But the moment I did the cargo plan, I knew something was off." He looked at me, like he was seeing through me. It was too heavy. I blinked, the unease in my stomach growing. I told them straight up, we weren't gonna lift it with the HH-60H. Too much weight, even with external cargo capacity. Villanueva shook his head. "So they called in a CH-53 Super Stallion. The Marines took over the mission." A chill ran through me, but I stayed silent. The rest of the story was coming. I could feel it. They hauled it out under cover of night, he muttered. And then, after that, it was all classified. No reports. No after-action debriefing. No records. Just a verbal order. This never happened. I ran a hand over my face. Everything felt wrong. The weight of his words crushed down on me. So what was it? I asked, trying to make sense of the horror we were discussing. A Nephilim, he whispered, his voice barely audible. A demon. A relic from before the flood. Before we even had names for things like that. The room seemed to close in on me, the air growing heavier with every word. I shivered, my mind reeling. What the hell had we unleashed? They buried it, Villanueva continued. Just like they buried your cave. And probably 100 others before that. He looked at me, his expression grim. They don't want people to know these things still walk the earth. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. What does that have to do with me? He stared at me for a long moment before answering, the weight of his gaze enough to break me. You saw them in that cave, didn't you? I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest.
Yeah.
They saw you too, he murmured. And when you got out, they followed. Just like they followed my father from Vietnam. Just like they followed me after that mission. A cold dread settled deep in my gut. The thought of these things following me, hunting me. It made my blood run cold. They latch on, Villanueva said softly, to soldiers. To war. They attach themselves to the ones who step too close to what they were never meant to see. I felt my hands shake as I gripped the rosary around my neck. So what do I do? He sighed, eyes dark with something ancient. You don't acknowledge them. You don't let them in. We both turned as the ship groaned beneath us, the lights flickering. Then came the knocking again, louder, closer. Right behind us. My heart raced. Villanueva turned to me, his breath steady but his eyes filled with the kind of fear I hadn't seen in years. They're here, he whispered. He pulled something from his flight suit, a small knife wrapped in cloth. His hands shook as he held it out to me. My father used this, he said. Said it was the only thing that ever worked. I swallowed, my stomach in knots. Worked for what? Villanueva didn't answer. He just nodded toward the hatch, which creaked open slowly. I didn't want to turn. But I had to. And when I did, I saw it. A shadow standing in the doorway. Not quite a man. Not quite anything human at all. And it smiled. The very air seemed to vibrate with its presence. A cold, ancient energy that seemed to pierce right through me. There was no mistaking it now. They were many. And they were still waiting. We ran. We ran as fast as we could, down the corridors of the ship, through the halls filled with darkness and whispered secrets. We knew the old refrigeration room was on the 5th level, but I never imagined it would come to this. The door to Ref number 1 was heavy, cold, and old, as though time had forgotten it. Villanueva quickly unlocked it. Inside, the temperature dropped dramatically. My breath came out in cold puffs as we stepped inside. There it was. The Nephilim. Its body lay sprawled in the center of the room, a giant easily 15 feet tall. Its blue skin was cracked, rough like stone. Its 6 fingers, so alien and unnatural, twitched ever so slightly. Its red hair fell around it like a violent wave. It was waking. I could feel it, like a tremor deep in the earth. Then it opened its eyes. I froze. The Nephilim stared at us with ancient, burning eyes. Then, its voice rumbled, deep and guttural. I know you. Villanueva and I exchanged a look, my heart pounding. We both stepped back. I know you, it repeated, its gaze piercing through us. You are from Ophir. I know Ophir. The words hung in the air like a curse, an unholy echo. I knew what it meant, even before we said it. But I couldn't stop myself. Villanueva's voice joined mine, as if we were chanting the words together. Yes, we are from Ophir. The Nephilim smiled. A twisted, dark smile. And the world trembled once again. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Be sure to come back for more spine-chilling stories. Are you brave enough to face the unknown? Hit like if you love horror, subscribe for more, and comment below, would you take the comic book or risk the clown's wrath? Don't forget to ring the bell for notifications, I'll ring it for you too. And if you're into horror that keeps you up at night, check out my books on Amazon, available in ebook, paperback, and hardcover. All from Mr. Lights Out, the master horror fantasy author from the Philippines. Writing and making videos helps me battle minor PTSD, but once you start reading, will you be able to stop? Links in the description below. Big thanks to Lara's horror sound on YouTube. Beware, once these stories grip your mind, they might never let go. Are you ready to face what lurks within the pages?